The wind came in off the prairie hard and hollow, like something was missing from it. Snow didn't fall so much as drift sideways, clinging to the warped siding of the depot and settling into the creases of her coat. Her fingers, stiff and red, tightened around the handles of the battered carpetbag. She didn't look at the children. Didn't dare. They were too quiet anyway. Cold and silence had taken the sharpness out of their cries days ago. The train hissed and pulled away behind her, leaving only steam and the stink of coal smoke. No one had stepped forward to meet them. No one had even turned their head. She could feel the eyes of the town flat, measuring distant, as if she were something blown in by mistake. Her boots sank into the slush as she took one slow step off the platform. Then another. The boy, the older of the two, wrapped his arms around the little one's shoulders and followed. Neither asked where they were going. Main Street was nothing more than a line of false fronts, bank, mercantile, livery, saloon, all dull with frost and smeared glass. The church sat at the far end like a scolding parent, its steeple a finger pointed at heaven. She didn't look that way either. The wind cut under her skirts as they walked. Her legs felt numb, her hip ached, and the last of the money was sewn into the hem of her dress. She had counted it 3 times on the train. It wasn't enough. The name Cayuga Ridge meant nothing to her, not really. Her husband had spoken of it once in a letter scribbled after a cattle drive back when he still wrote at all. Said the grass went gold in late summer, the kind that shimmered when the wind blew across it. Said maybe they'd come here someday when things settled, but things never had. He died in a mining camp near Salt Lake chasing another kind of gold. She got the letter from a preacher's wife who'd wrapped it in linen and prayers. There'd been no body, no money either. Just a name and a place and a story nobody else seemed to want. They passed the saloon and the piano faltered mid-note. Someone had seen them. The boy's shoulders hunched a little tighter. The little girl stumbled, and she caught her, hoisting her up against her hip, though the weight nearly buckled her. She didn't stop. They reached the boarding house, paint-peeling windows fogged. A sign hung crooked on the door. She knocked. A woman with tired eyes and red knuckles opened it halfway, took one look and shook her head. No charity. Full up. She tried to speak, but her throat had closed dry with wind and fear. She looked down at her children, looked back at the woman. Her lips cracked when she finally said, "I can sew, mend, clean, whatever's needed." The door stayed half open. "You got anyone to vouch for you?" She hesitated, then slowly reached into her coat and pulled out the folded, worn letter from her husband, the return address barely legible. The woman scanned it, sighed, and opened the door the rest of the way. "One night. You work, you stay. But the kids stay quiet. Town's got no patience for noise or newcomers." That night she sat on the edge of the bed, holding her daughter as she slept while the boy curled up near the stove. Her fingers bled from mending a torn wool coat with needles too dull and thread too brittle. Outside, the wind didn't let up. It howled through the eaves like something grieving. No one had said her name since she arrived. No one had asked. In this town she was only what they saw, a burden, a problem, something best ignored or passed by. But she wasn't dead yet, and neither were her children. Across town, a man sat alone at a poker table long after the others had left. His knuckles bruised, his whiskey untouched. He stared at the snow piling outside the window and wondered if maybe it was time to do something that mattered. Morning came, thin and gray light leaking in around the crooked window frame. Cold settled into the boards of the floor and the marrow of her bones. Her daughter still slept, cheek flushed from the stove's warmth. The boy was already up, pulling on his 2 small boots with a stubborn twist of the mouth that reminded her of his father. She tied her hair back with shaking hands and stepped into the hallway. The boarding house was silent except for the creak of floorboards and the steady drip of melting snow from the eaves. She made her way to the kitchen where the woman from the night before stood at the stove stirring something in a dented tin pot. "Coffee's weak," the woman muttered without turning. "Biscuits'll be ready when they're ready. You want to stay another night, start with the laundry." There were 3 tubs in the shed out back, half filled with frozen water and linen stiff with old soap. Her hands burned from the cold, then went numb. She worked in silence, sleeves rolled up, teeth gritted. By the time her fingers could no longer bend, she had scrubbed through 2 baskets of strangers' clothes. She was given a slice of bread and a strip of lard for her effort. No one said thank you. That night she tucked the children in again and sat by the stove with her mending. Her vision blurred. She thought about her mother's garden, long dead now, and the way sage used to smell in the morning after a rain. She thought of the way her husband used to hum when he shaved, how he'd once promised to build her a porch. Then she thought of the man at the poker table. He had been there when she passed, just a shape in the window with slumped shoulders and a face cut from regret. She didn't know his name, didn't care to, but she had seen something there, a crack in the stillness, maybe, like a door not quite shut. His name was Elias Mercer, though no one used the whole of it. Just Eli, if they said anything at all. He kept to himself, drank little, spoke less. Rode into town every few weeks and left the same way with no one asking why. They said he'd once run with McAllister's crew back before the hanging. Said he'd killed a man in Kansas, or maybe Montana. Said he'd lost a brother or a wife or both. He lived out near the old gravel rise where the land pitched and rolled like a sea caught in stone. Had a cabin half sunk into the hill and a dog too old to bark. Most folks left him alone the way they did with things they didn't understand or couldn't fix. But he noticed her. Not right away, not with anything like interest, more like recognition. A glance too long, a pause before turning, the way he watched her hands as she swept the walk outside the mercantile, the way his eyes followed the boy as he tried to carry a sack too heavy for his back. He saw the way the town ignored them. She saw him watch, said nothing. A week passed, then 2. She cleaned floors, patched holes, made herself useful without being seen. The boarding house woman gave her a corner room and a cot. The children learned to be silent. Then one morning the wind died. It was a rare thing in that place, stillness, the kind that settled like judgment. The sky was white and tight, holding back snow. She had just stepped out with a bucket when she saw him standing at the edge of the street, his hat low, his coat dusted with frost. Eli. He looked at her like he'd come to a decision he wasn't proud of but couldn't turn from. She kept her eyes on the bucket, her knuckles white around the handle. "Ma'am," he said, quietly tipping his hat. She didn't answer. Didn't need to. "Stay on the long ride, subscribe today." He didn't come closer. Just stood there like the street between them was wider than it was, like he knew if he crossed it too fast something might break. She set the bucket down, her hands trembling from more than cold. The children were inside. The morning was still. The town watched from behind curtains and half-cracked doors. That kind of silence always meant judgment. "I heard you was looking for work," Ellie said. Her throat tightened. She looked up at him fully for the first time. "I have work," she said, quiet but firm. "Not good work," he replied, no mockery in it, just truth. The wind stirred as if rethinking its retreat. She waited. "I got a place," he went on. "Too much for one man to manage. Ain't much, but it's clean. Needs hands. Could use someone that don't spook easy." She didn't answer. Not right away. He shifted. "You and the young ones could stay in the loft till you get on your feet." "That why you're offering?" she asked, voice low. He looked down at his boots, then up at the sky. "No," he said finally. "Just tired of watching this town pretend folks don't bleed." That night she packed their things again. Not much more than they came, with a few shirts, the mended dress, the cracked comb her daughter loved. The boy stayed silent, his jaw tight, but his eyes held something that hadn't been there in weeks. They rode out before sunrise, bundled under blankets in the back of Eli's wagon. The snow hadn't started yet, but the sky warned it was coming. He said little as he drove, hands steady on the reins, his profile sharp against the pale morning. The road twisted and fell away behind them. The town disappeared. Only the land remained flat and open, rimmed with cottonwoods and distant hills. Crows wheeled overhead, calling out over the empty fields. His place was a long shape tucked against a bluff gray wood, half set into the rise. Smoke trickled from the chimney. A barn leaned into the wind nearby, stubborn against collapse. Fences stretched out in both directions, half mended. He helped them down, but didn't reach for her. She noticed that inside it was warmer than she expected. Sparse, clean. A wood stove ticked in the corner, and blankets hung over the windows to keep the cold out. The loft was narrow but dry, with enough room for the children to sleep side by side. "I'll be gone most days," he said, watching her scan the space. "But you'll have time to learn the stove. Water's out back. Pump freezes, but it works if you talk nice." She let out something close to a laugh, small and brief. He didn't smile, but something in him eased. "I don't want pity," she said, facing him. "You won't get it." Silence settled between them again, but it wasn't sharp now. It was something softer, truer. The children curled up in the loft as dusk pulled its long arms over the fields. She stood at the window, watching the last light fall behind the bluff. Eli was out by the barn, fixing the hinge on the gate, shoulders bent but sure. She didn't know what this was yet, if it was safety or just another waiting room for sorrow. But the quiet wasn't cruel here. The wind, when it came, didn't sound like grief, just winter. She turned from the window and stoked the fire. Snow came that night, soft at first, then heavier, falling in quiet sheets that blanketed the fields and muffled every sound. Morning broke with white light leaking through the blanket-covered windows, and a hush so deep it felt like the house itself was holding its breath. Eli was already gone when she woke. The stove was warm, freshly stoked, and a bucket of water sat near the hearth, ice-crusted thin at the rim. She touched it and thought of his hands doing that before light had even touched the sky. She dressed the children, wrapped them in scarves she'd knit from unraveled sweaters, then stepped outside. The cold hit like a slap, but the sky was clear, almost blue. The barn door hung ajar, creaking in the stillness. She walked toward it, boots crunching through snow, each step a test of this new life. Inside the barn was dim, but the hay gave off a warm, earthy scent. A few hens scratched near the back wall, and a goat bleated softly from its stall. It was not much, but it was alive. She found work without needing to be told, mucking out stalls, feeding the animals, checking fence lines when the wind dropped. Her body ached, hands blistered back, pulled tight with effort, but it was honest work. And in doing it she felt something small and vital return. The boy followed Eli when he came back, trailing at a careful distance like a shadow, learning how to move in daylight. He watched him chop wood, watched how he tested the wire on the fence, how he spoke to the mare with low patience and no sharpness. Eli never pushed him, never told him what to do. But tools were left out in plain sight, and by the second week the boy was carrying them back before being asked. At night they sat around the stove. The girl would press her face to her mother's side, and the boy would stretch out on the floor closer than before. Eli didn't speak much, but his presence was solid, like the wall behind you in a storm. One evening she found a book left by her pillow, worn spine, soft pages. A Bible maybe once, but repurposed into a ledger. Inside were pressed flowers, faded names, small notations in a careful hand. She traced a name on the inside cover: Margaret Mercer. His mother. Or maybe a sister. She didn't ask. Later that night, she stood in the doorway of the kitchen while he repaired a boot by lantern light. "I found your book." He nodded. "You can keep it there." She'd have liked that. There was no smile in his voice, but there wasn't sorrow either. Just memory, worn down like stone, smoothed by years of wind. "You're good with them," she said, meaning the children. He looked up. "They don't flinch. That's more than I can say for most." She looked down at her hands. The raw skin, the cracked knuckles. "I'm not afraid of work," she said. "I know." They didn't speak again that night, but the quiet between them felt like something earned. Snow kept falling. The world grew still and white, but inside the cabin things stirred. A shelf was added above the stove. A second quilt appeared on the loft bed. The girl began humming again. The boy started to smile, shy and small, like a seed catching light. And she began to look Eli in the eye. Not long, but long enough. By the third snowfall, the town had started talking. Whispers slipped from the mouths of storekeepers and traveled through the church pews, quiet and sharp. The widow with 2 children living out at Mercer's place, well, that was something folks didn't quite know how to name. And people don't like what they can't name. She felt it first in the stairs, how the shopkeeper no longer made small talk when she came for flour, how the dressmaker, once kind, turned away mid-sentence to tend her pins. The pastor's wife, who'd offered a pair of mittens early on, now crossed the street before they passed. But she said nothing, just carried her parcels and walked back through the cold, chin lifted. Her children didn't need her shame. They needed her spine. Eli didn't ask, but he knew. She could see it in the way he watched her more closely when she came back into the house. The way his eyes lingered on her hands when they were shaking from cold or nerves. One night after the children had gone to sleep, she stood by the fire with her arms folded tight across her chest. "Maybe it'd be easier if I went back," she said quietly. He looked up from his chair, the firelight drawing shadows under his jaw. "Back where?" She didn't answer, because there wasn't a place, just the idea of somewhere else. Somewhere quieter, less watched, less judged. Eli stood and walked to the window. The wind scraped faintly at the glass. "This town don't forget, but it don't know either. It doesn't know what it costs to stay when it's easier to run. It don't know what it is to raise 2 kids with nothing but thread and grit." She stared at him. Her throat felt tight again, but this time it wasn't from cold. "You think they'll ever let it be?" she asked. "I don't care what they let," he said. "You've done more with nothing than most men around here do with everything." Silence stretched heavy but not uncomfortable. He looked at her. Not with pity, not with expectation, just saw her. "I don't want you to go," he said. "But I'll help you if that's what you need." She didn't move, only looked back at him. "I don't want to go either." The next day the boy followed Ellie to the upper pasture, said nothing on the walk but carried the feed pail like it was his own. "Can I learn?" he asked suddenly, voice cracking in the cold. Eli looked at him. "You already are." Back at the house, she found the girl sitting by the window, drawing shapes in the frost. The child turned and asked if they'd be staying for spring. She couldn't say why, but the question undid her. She crouched down, wrapped her arms around her daughter, and held on for a long time. That night, Eli brought in a small sack of seed, set it on the table without a word. She ran her hand over the coarse fabric, felt the future in it. "Southfield could take beans," he said, "if the ground's willing." She looked at him across the table. "So could I." He gave a slow nod. Outside, the wind softened. Spring came hard and slow, like the earth didn't quite trust it yet. Snow melt turned the yard to muck, and the creek rose high, snapping tree limbs in its teeth. But the air warmed. The sun stayed longer, and the girl began collecting wildflowers again, stuffing them into her mother's pockets without a word. In town, the whispers thickened. The widow and the cowboy. The bastard children. The shame of it, folks said. Never mind the good fence lines or the way Eli had started showing up for Sunday service again, sitting in the back with his hat in his hands, eyes low. That kind of steadiness didn't interest people. They preferred the wound. Still, he stood beside her when she came to town. Not behind. Not ahead. And when they passed the mercantile and someone spat near their feet, he only looked once, quiet and deadly calm, and no one tried it again. She started selling eggs, sewing for families that pretended not to see her face but paid her fare, especially when stitches held through hard weather. The boy helped Eli repair fence posts, watching how to measure twice, hammer once. The girl followed her mother through the fields, mimicking every move, every prayer muttered over seed dropped into dark soil. It was in these small days that something fragile took root. One evening, after the dishes had been stacked and the fire had burned low, Eli reached for a box she hadn't seen before. It was small, wooden, the lid smooth from years of touch. He opened it and laid something carefully on the table. A ring. Worn but solid, gold dulled with age. "It was my mother's," he said. "She used to say it weren't much, but it held, even when the roof didn't." Her breath caught. She didn't touch it. "I ain't a preacher," he went on. "Ain't much of a man most days. But I know what I want, and I know how to keep it." Her fingers brushed the ring. It was warm from his hand. She looked at him then, really looked, and saw not just the man who'd taken them in, but the one who'd stayed, who'd chosen quiet steadiness over noise, who had waited for her to be ready without asking her to rush. She swallowed hard, nodded once. "I don't need a church," she said. "Just a place that's mine." He reached across the table and closed her hand around the ring. "You already got it?" Spring deepened. The creek settled. Wild grasses pushed up through the black earth. In the back pasture, the boy built a scarecrow with his sister arguing over the shape of the hat. She laughed like wind through cottonwood. The town didn't come around all at once. But fence by fence, egg by egg, someone would nod. Someone else would tip their hat. And slowly, as the earth softened, so did the edges of what they thought they knew. One Sunday, the pastor asked if she'd like to read the closing hymn. Her voice shook, but she did. Eli stood in the back, hat in hand, eyes steady. That night she slid the ring onto her finger. There was no ceremony, no crowd, just quiet, warmth, a man's hand finding hers beneath the quilt, a child's sigh from the loft above. The future didn't knock. It simply settled in the way roots take hold beneath the surface, steady and unseen. Summer arrived in soft layers, early light, long evenings, warm earth underfoot. The crops took hold. Beans climbed their poles. The goat kidded twins. The hens laid regular. The world didn't shout its progress, but if you paid attention, you saw it in the small things: a green chute, a barn door hanging straight, the boy's shoulders broader now when he carried the pail. Eli never made speeches, but she came to understand his love in the way he moved. He sharpened her shears without asking. He added a latch to the barn door after she startled at it swinging in the wind. He built a bench under the cottonwood where she liked to rest after supper. And she no longer braced for the world to fall. Not every day. There were hard hours still. Money was tight and a cough carried different weight out here. But she no longer counted the days by distance from sorrow. Now she counted rows, planted letters learned by the girl, the time it took for bread to rise. Late one night she woke to find the bed empty beside her. She pulled a shawl over her shoulders and stepped outside. Eli was out in the yard, standing in the dark. No coat, just a cigarette burning low in one hand, the other tucked in his back pocket. She crossed the yard barefoot, the grass damp underfoot. "What is it?" she asked. He didn't turn at first. "Dreamed of my brother," he said finally. "It's been a long time." She waited. He was younger, funnier. Went out in a flood trying to save a mare he didn't even like. His voice cracked just once. She stepped beside him. Didn't speak, just touched his elbow lightly. Eli shook his head. "I thought I buried it. That it didn't need to come with me here." She looked out at the dark horizon with him. Stars blinked low and tired. The wind smelled like wheat and ash. "It all comes," she said. "Eventually. The good and the ruin. They don't separate easy." He looked at her then. No mask left. Just a man stripped to the bone, asking if it was all right to still carry pain even after finding peace. She reached for his hand. "You don't have to be whole to be loved," she said. "You just have to stay." He kissed her for the first time then. Not with hunger or fire, but with the kind of stillness that settles after a storm has passed. With gratitude, with grief, with a slow blooming of something rooted deep. After that night something shifted. Not quickly, but certain. The boy called him Sir Les and Ellie Moore. The girl asked if she could help name the new calf. One morning she caught herself singing while kneading dough, an old hymn she hadn't remembered knowing. She realized she hadn't thought of leaving in weeks. Summer rolled on and the world ripened. At the edge of the field, Eli built a fence for a new pasture. He worked slow, careful. Said he was thinking of getting more stock next year. And when she looked at the land from the porch, the hills, the cabin, the pale line of smoke from the stove, it didn't feel borrowed anymore. It felt like home. By harvest, the town could no longer ignore them. It wasn't just that the beans came up strong or that Eli's fences held through the summer storms. It wasn't even the way the widow people still called her, that though her name had returned to some lips, walked through the market with a quiet steadiness, her daughter's hand in hers and the boy helping load sacks of grain. It was that they'd lasted. No scandal had come. No collapse. Just a family holding on. That unsettled folks more than anything else. One afternoon, a man from the town council came out with a notice about property lines, some confusion with a neighbor's claim. He didn't look her in the eye, but he handed her the form polite enough. Eli read it over slow, thanked him without flinching. When the man left, they stood together by the gate. "They thought we'd fight," she said. "They thought we'd fail," Eli replied. "But they didn't. Trouble did come, though. It always does. It started with a rider from across the ridge, a man from her past. Not kin, not quite friend, just someone who'd known her husband. He came with questions. With a claim, he said. Something about a debt, owed a share of something, buried a mine he said she had no right to forget." Eli listened, arms folded, silent through the whole thing. The man turned sharp near the end, voice rising. "You think you can just set up a new life like the old one never happened?" She didn't answer right away. Just looked him in the eye, calm as still water. "I didn't forget the old life," she said. "I buried it myself." He stepped forward like he might argue, might press more. But Eli shifted. "Just a little. Just enough." The man backed down. Rode off. That night she sat at the table, hands in her lap, heart hollowed out. Not from fear, not even from the past rearing up again, but from how easy it was to lose your place, even after working so hard to earn it. "They'll keep coming," she said. Eli didn't deny it, just knelt beside her chair, took her hand. "Then we'll keep standing." After that, the boy started sleeping with the old hound by the door just in case. The girl asked if bad men always rode horses. She told her no. Said sometimes they just didn't know how to leave things buried. But nothing more came. No letter. No second rider, only the first frost cutting across the fields like a quiet warning. They brought in the last of the beans together, the boy tall enough now to carry his share without wobbling. The girl bundled in Eli's old scarf, laughing as she chased a hen through brittle cornstalks. That night they sat around the stove, tired but easy. Eli carved a piece of hickory into a spoon and she patched a rip in the boy's coat. There was no rush, no fear, just warmth and the sound of breathing. Later, after the children had gone to bed, she leaned against Ellie by the fire. "I want to stay," she said. "Not just because it's safe, because it's ours." Ellie nodded, kissed the top of her head. Outside, the wind was rising again. Winter was coming, and it would be hard. But they had food and a roof and hands that held on when the world tried to loosen your grip, and love not loud or perfect, but solid, lasting. Winter rolled in heavy and early. The first storm came before the pumpkins had softened in the field. By November, snow stacked up against the barn walls and covered the fence rails like folded sheet. The cold was sharp, mean at times, but they were ready. Eli had cut and stacked enough wood to last through 2 hard seasons. The boy helped not just out of duty now, but with a quiet pride. The girl learned to sew buttons straight and fold biscuits without tearing the dough. And she no longer startled at every knock or raised voice. Her hands moved with steadiness. Her eyes held peace, but not the kind that forgets what it took to earn it. One morning just before Christmas, she found Eli out back near the old shed. He was hammering something into the snow-packed ground. She walked out wrapped in her shawl. "What is it?" she asked. He looked up, brushing sawdust from his gloves. "Clothesline post. Thought maybe come spring we'd need a longer one. More clothes to hang." She blinked, lips parting, then smiled, slow, real. "That your way of telling me something?" Eli shrugged, but his mouth curled just slightly. "Figure we might add to the count." The words came easy. The meaning hit deep. She didn't answer at first, just stepped toward him, took his hand and held it to her belly. Nothing there yet but hope. But that was enough. They spent Christmas in the cabin, just the 4 of them. A string of cranberries hung over the hearth. The girl painted pine cones with ash and flour. The boy carved a whistle from a scrap of cedar. Eli made stew and she baked bread, and when the wind screamed outside, they only drew closer. After dinner, Eli pulled a small package from his coat, wrapped in old cloth tied with twine. He handed it to her. She opened it slow, careful. Inside was a silver brooch, nothing grand but clean, polished, a flower etched in the middle, worn down like it had passed through many hands. "It was my sister's," he said. "She never got to wear it. Seems right it finds a place now." She looked at him for a long time. "I don't need pretty things," she said. "I know," he replied, "but that don't mean you shouldn't have one." She wore it that night, pinned it to her collar like armor. The months passed quietly after that. Snow came and went. There were small fevers, short tempers, laughter too. The boy asked Eli about how land gets passed on. The girl asked if she could help name the baby. And when spring came again, muddy and sweet and full of small miracles, the past no longer pressed so heavy on their backs. One morning, Eli stood by the fence holding a post steady as the boy drove it in. The girl ran barefoot through the yard, shrieking with joy. And on the porch, her belly round now beneath her apron, she watched them all with eyes full of something like grace. This place, this life, it wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and it was enough. The journey goes on. Subscribe and ride with us.